that couldn't make it. Thanks, Sophie. So I'm Sue Howard. I work at NHSGM and I'm the head of workforce development, and I'm going to share with you our evaluation framework today. Let's bring up the slides. Someone just let me know if they're sharing okay.
Yeah, they're sharing.
Thanks, so thank you. Thanks, Wendy. So yeah, we've been doing some work in the space of evaluation with our portfolio over the last few years, and it's culminated in this evaluation framework, which I'm going to talk you through. But I guess it's worth just going back to the start and making sure that we've got a common understanding about what we mean by evaluation here. So in its broadest sense, evaluation is ideally there to demonstrate the extent a project's done what it intended to do originally. It can flag things that went really well in the project, and it can also identify things that didn't go so well that could be improved, and that can really help inform current work that's going on and also future plans as well. Robust evaluation can really help shine a light on those impacts, celebrate success, create opportunity, and importantly demonstrate return on investment. And that, for most of us in healthcare at the moment, is becoming an increasing issue. Things are getting tighter, and to be able to continue good work going forward, sometimes that requires us to make a case for that to continue. This is certainly something we have drawn on over the last year for those reasons, but also things like being able to land awards, for example. It can be really quite powerful evaluation. Strong evaluation data can make a difference in the way that you communicate the impact from your project in so many ways. It can take many forms, and it can be scaled depending on the need, and that doesn't always relate to the size of the project, but it can be a whole host of factors: strategic importance, availability of data, a whole raft of things really. But it's important that just to acknowledge that it doesn't have to be this enormous thing. It can be quite a bounded piece of work, but the benefit really comes from being able to do the right things. Could I just ask people to make sure they're on mute, because we've got a little bit of background noise. Thank you. So just to give you a sense of where this has come from, this is work that's been developed through the workforce development portfolio, which I oversee on behalf of Greater Manchester. It's money that came from Health Education England originally, and it meant that we held the portfolio, but actually lots of system partners did some of the work in that space. And it meant that we wanted to make sure that those investments were as optimal as possible, and we got the best return on investment. So when I joined the team about 3 years ago, I identified a need, and 2 years ago, we introduced the use of logic models, which sounds very fancy, but actually it's a really simple tool that can add a lot of value, not just in terms of evaluation, but in a whole host of ways. It can act as a really good project brief, and you can use it as a tool to engage with system partners to bottom out exactly what it is you're going to do. So we all have an early common understanding, but it can play a really important role in terms of the evaluation later, which I'm going to go into a bit more detail over the next few slides. We had an evaluation review last year by an external company, and there was a whole raft of things in that piece of work, but one of the things they came out with was one of their observations was the introduction of logic models made a significant difference. It drove a step change in this space in terms of evaluation, as well as in that broader sense. So I wanted to just flag that it wasn't just our anecdotal thought of the benefit, but it was an external company that felt that that was also the case. And it just adds weight, I guess, to the fact that they are such a useful tool. From that external evaluation as well, one of the things where we came to was that we needed a more standardised approach to our evaluation as well at the back end. And through that work, we created lots of additional resources that we pulled together this package to support evaluation in that portfolio. Because there was quite a lot of resources in that space, I felt that pulling that together in a framework then allowed people to navigate through it more readily. So that was when we pulled this evaluation framework together. And the purpose was for use with the workforce development portfolio, but we recognised quite quickly there was a lot of interest from elsewhere, regional partners, other systems, people working within our Greater Manchester system that really felt that there was much greater, wider utility with these resources. So that's why we're sharing with them today. It's not mandated. We ask it, some of our workforce development portfolio, we ask them to do it. but this is not mandated for elsewhere. It's just an opportunity to use these resources rather than people reinventing the wheel, and try to raise the game in terms of evaluation as well. So this is what it looks like. It's a one-pager. It's held on our Greater Manchester ICP website, so it's publicly available. There's no sign-ins or anything like that. And all the resources are held within. And the idea of the framework is to help you navigate through this process. So just to talk you briefly through to show you the navigation. So each stage of the evaluation, very early stage, shaping up what the project looks like, a plan, reviewing, and then actually delivering the evaluation report. The purpose of each of those stages and how it can help you in your project delivery, and all of the supporting documents within as well. So each of those, you'll notice there's usually a template document, a guidance document, and then if you want a bit more support, there are also training videos as well held on YouTube that can help give a bit more context and support in that space as well for those people that would like it. Timeline at the bottom is helpful, but we've been intentionally vague because obviously some projects are 3 months and some of them are 3 years and all things in between and beyond. So many of us in healthcare are working on 12-month rolling contracts, and so many projects are 12-month focused. So to give you an indication, I would expect this first stage might be done, say, in the first 3 months of your project. And that will differ hugely depending on whether you've already hit the ground running and you kind of know what it is before you started, or whether actually there's a shaping up and scoping work that needs to be done. So that it can be quite fluid when you do this, but I would say the sooner the better. And it can actually help get you that project definition. So this is what a logic model looks like. It's that first stage. And to just talk you through, and I'm going to perhaps focus on this most today because this is your foundation, and I'll tell you why it's most important as we move through it. So if you Google logic models, there are a whole host of them out there. This is a really nice one. This is one we've chosen to adopt, and it was actually from a set of resources that are for evaluation for the NHS, and I can see why, because it's a really nice one. So just again, navigate you through this, a bit of context about what your project is, some rationale about why it needs to change, jumping down to the bottom, assumptions. So things that you might need to consider, or things that could derail your project perhaps if they're removed or changed throughout the course of the delivery. And those might be things that indeed you would include in your risk register, things that might change, policies might change, retraction of support from stakeholders, whatever that might be. This bit in the middle, I think, is the bit that's a little bit more challenging, but it's very, very much doable. So inputs are the things that you need to make the project happen. So that might be staff time, it might be additional non-staff costs, there might be technology, kit, whatever the inputs are to make that project happen. Activities are what it says on the tin, things that you need to do to make the project happen itself. It might be setting up groups, it might be documentation, it might be some scoping work. It depends very much on the nature of your project, but it's those kind of activities and things that need to be done. Outputs are the things that you will create. So that could be online web resource, it could be training, it could be a business case, it could be an intervention. And an example I'm going to use here to create some distinction about these last three, you know, a lot of us are working in the developmental space, so perhaps we might want to train some nurses in leadership skills, for example. That's the output. The events are the outputs that we're going to actually work towards delivering. The next one along is outcomes. And this is the change as a result of your project, the change as a result of the outputs that you've created and the activities that you've undertaken. So using this specific example, using that training, it might improve the morale, confidence and knowledge of those people that have had the training. Again, can you just make sure you're muted, please? We're getting some feedback. Thank you. And then impacts on the far right-hand side. Are those wider things. They're quite often longitudinal, larger scale, sometimes more difficult to measure, and they can't always be attributed to your project. So if you're aiming through this training, the idea of the vision of the first, the aim of the project might have been to improve retention of that staff group or to improve clinical care for that cohort of patients. that's quite big stuff, and it's quite difficult to capture whether you have impacted on retention or clinical care has improved. It might take a long period of time to detect whether that clinical care has changed and has had a positive impact on the patient. But if you take a step back, there might be some more bounded outcomes that you can measure as part of your project that indicate that potentially those impacts may happen downstream. My reflection on this is that when we've worked with our portfolio, some people feel a little bit disappointed that they're working on quite bounded outcomes. But I can't stress this enough, that if you can capture them impacts, then brilliant. But they're so hard to do, having worked in the evaluation world. Sometimes you can try and measure them, but it takes a long time, and there's so much other stuff happening in this space that actually to say that that is a direct result of your project is quite challenging. So I would encourage people to definitely focus on this outcome box. This is fundamental. And I would say in terms of the development of the logic model, this is the hardest box to get right. So our reflections from rolling these out across our portfolio were that, as I said, the outcome section is the most difficult bit to get right. And by observation, the first few times you do a logic model, it does need a bit of support. And then once you get it and you're in the zone, it's very much much more readily able to be completed. But in the interim, how you might get that level of support in your own teams is something that perhaps you could have a reflect upon. So we did it, for example, by putting an evaluation subgroup together, a panel of people that had, some of them had experience in evaluation, but many of them just had an interest in this space. And we worked together to review other project teams' logic models. And between us, it was a bit of a train the trainer type model. That panel was upskilled to be able to write their own logic models well, and also to critique other people's. And we've continued that over the years. So everybody's logic model can have feedback and have that iterative learning process. You could also do this through communities of practice, so bringing project teams together. So, you know, if you've got projects that are quite similar, like if you use the example of training, for example, bring those groups together and they might learn from each other. Oh, you're measuring this. Oh, we're tackling it like this. This is how we're doing our evaluation. That can be quite a powerful process too. And if that's just not possible within the space that you work, because of capacity and how you're connected in the system, etc., then even just having a colleague that would act as a clinical friend can make all the difference. Someone that's slightly outside the box that can provide that level of feedback. It's definitely worth revisiting this through the project timeline. We actually get people to review it mid-year and end-of-year report as well. Did you deliver what you said in the outset? And it can just help recenter people and reassess if things have changed. How might you address the evaluation in response to that change? And to double check that my message has got through, your evaluation should map back to your outcomes. That's the bit that often people miss. This isn't a nice to have. I think if you skip this bit, you're missing a massive trick. So just to give you a quick example of a specific case, to just highlight this a bit further. So if you've got a training course that upskills in new NICE guidance, so this is best practice that's trying to improve clinical care. Lots of people in the space of training tend to just capture how many people have attended the course and how much they've rated it. But I would say that that tells you that it's happened, but it doesn't give you an indication about whether it's changed anything. And so the evaluate is still part of your evaluation, but it leans towards the outputs, measuring outputs rather than outcomes. The idea of the training is about improving patient care, but to be able to readily detect that, as I said earlier, is quite a challenging space. It definitely tells you whether something's changed, but that's quite complicated, complex, usually involves quite a lot of resource attached to the evaluation. So if you can include it, fantastic, but it may not be possible with your project. So the potential sweet spot in the middle relates to these outcomes, and it might be possible, for example, to measure if the new NICE guidance has been adopted. So in a clinical setting, that might be changing coding on the clinical system, the use of a tool or an intervention that you can track. You could explore if pathways have changed or look for feedback from the people are delivering this care or have attended the courses, has anything changed as a result? And so that's that sweet spot in the middle. It definitely tells us that the training has worked, that the NICE guidance has seeped into people's brains and people have started using it. Hope that makes sense. So just to go back onto the evaluation framework itself, so hopefully that's covered off and given you a view of this stage one, the logic models. We will be covering a little bit this more later. After the recorded session, we're going to do a non-recorded interactive element later on in this session, but also there's a whole host of resources there that can help you do this in a bit more detail. So I'm just going to very briefly mention this bit. And the reason why I can be brief about this is there's a whole host of resources here that this is already, down on paper and down on YouTube that you can access these resources. So rather than repeat that, just to give you a flavour of what this looks like. And the good news is all those resources for those stages 2, 3 and 4 are effectively the same. The same template you can use for your evaluation plan. You review it partway through your project to check it's still on track, and you use the same template to actually deliver your evaluation at the back end. So this is what it looks like, this cycle. So you prepare, you plan your evaluation, and the resources within the evaluation framework will take you through this process step by step and provide a load of prompts and ideas that help direct your thinking in this space. Then after planning, you might start collecting the data and measuring it, then doing the analysis stage, and then reporting the findings at the back end. So the resources in the framework will help you through each stage of this process. To give you a little sense of what the support prompts are in each of those stages. So if we look at this prepare section, the prepare resources then will take you through the evaluation plan and give you lots of bullet points of things you might want to consider as part of your evaluation design. So I'm not going to go through this in any detail today. You certainly don't need to read all of these slides. We will provide them after, but they're also in the resources in the framework too. Measurement is definitely something we've noticed is the next sort of sticking point for people. They can get so far, but then it proves really difficult in terms of how you measure the outcomes. Is still a challenge. Access to data, whether the data is accurate, we're working in a challenging space here. But we have included some resources, including driver diagrams that can really help you work through this step by step. And driver diagrams like this one here, a really great way of trying to break down that thinking and help support you move to the right direction. Also just wanted to flag here as well, mixed methods are really helpful. And by that, I mean, you might want to take a few different approaches in what you're measuring. So quantitative data is the stuff that we can count. Using the training example, how many people attended, how many people have changed to this new process. It's the measurables, it's the numbers. It might be a score about how they feel in terms of confidence or whatever it might be. It's numerical. And then if you couple that with the qualitative feedback, it adds a layer of context around that. So you might see a quirky peak in the data, but you can explain that using your qualitative data, surveys, focus groups, interviews, other contextual information. And it's the combination of those two things that's really powerful. In terms of the back end, we've provided a template for you to work through, and again, full of prompts and ideas and inspiration of things that you might want to consider in your report findings as well, thinking about that next step about how do you convey this information most effectively to your stakeholders. So that in a nutshell is a whistle-stop tour around our evaluation framework. Hopefully that's given you a sense of what's available there and whether you think that that might work in your space and might be a useful resource. Our take-home messages from our experiences using this is, I'll say this one more time, defining outcomes in the logic model is key. If you don't do that, you often collect a lot of data that it doesn't actually address what you set out to demonstrate in the first place. It can actually reduce your workload by doing the logic model, because you can think, actually, that's not really going to tell me anything. I'm not going to do that bit. It really focuses your mind about what the really valuable things are. Identifying measurable benefits that are attributable to your project, that are effective measures of success, can be really challenging. but it's a key focus area. So if you get the sweet spot between the two, accurately measure your outcomes, that if you do nothing else, that is a game changer in itself. Try and plan your evaluations early. It allows you to take baselines. You can set targets for the remainder of your project, which can be a real driver for driving people's activity and focusing, areas of greatest need. And make sure that you collect the right data all the way along. I've done it myself so many times. Get to the end and go, oh, we should have captured that. It's too late. It's past, fortunately. Hidden bias, I also wanted to acknowledge as well. And just sometimes asking broader questions in your evaluation can be really important. Not just did we deliver what we said, but are there any unintended consequences, either positive or negative, that we've learned throughout this? And I think as a healthcare system, we don't necessarily share the things that went wrong enough, because it's important learning for other people to build on. So how do you do that? You can do that within your project teams and asking those broader questions and reflecting, I suppose, but also involvement of fresh eyes can be really powerful. People that are not necessarily focused on the end goal, that can give you that broader perspective. And upskilling evaluation, we found this really useful. It provides that fresh eyes that have that level of expertise. And there are a number of ways of doing that, but it would be something that you might want to consider in your own worlds about how you might best provide that. I will be sharing these slides with you at the end, and we have a whole raft of other resources and tools that we have drawn on to build this evaluation framework and to build the evaluation report. There's lots of resources throughout, but these are some of our key ones that we felt we wanted to flag with you today that are really, really useful. And happy there to just pause and take any questions.